Hey there, my name is Pastor Travis. I'm the lead pastor here at Canvas SF, and I'm just so honored that you would watch our teaching here online or on the Canvas app. Wherever you are, I just want you to know that you were created to create, you were imagined to imagine, and one thing that just keeps me up at night and wakes me up in the morning is seeing you step in rhythm with the fully alive life that you were created for. You were not created to exist, you were created to be fully alive. As a matter of fact, that's why we exist as a church, to point creatives to their Creator that they would become fully alive followers of Jesus. And so my heart is that this teaching will empower you and inspire you to be the creator you were always created to be as you pursue the fully alive life of Jesus. Let's watch together.
Have you ever had someone say the wrong thing with the right intention? Have you ever, so you're like, they said it and they thought it was going to like be a great thing, like you were going to receive it really well, but it was like totally the wrong thing to say, even with the right intention. Those are the worst, aren't they? Because you can't even get mad about it. Like they say something to you and you're like, I know you didn't mean it to sound the way that you just said it, but it was absolutely the wrong thing to say, even with the right intention. I remember my grandma, God rest her soul. I remember I would go over to her house as a little boy, and she would do this every time. I don't know why she would do this, but I would go over to her house, and she would lean down, and she would go, "Hey, Travis, you are so pretty." And then she'd give me a hug. And I'm like, "Grandma, why you calling me pretty?" Like, no boy wants to be called pretty. And so I'm like, "Thanks, Grandma. Right intention, but the wrong thing to say." Well, around the time of the 5-year anniversary of Canvas in October, I had a lot of people call and text and email me, and a lot of people would say this. They would go, "Travis, you know, 5 years is a big mile marker for a church." And it is. I'm not diminishing that, but what they said next is what bothered me. They said, 5 years is kind of a big mile marker for a church. After 5 years, statistically speaking, that usually means that the church is going to make it. Everyone say, make it. The church is going to make it. And I hated it every time I heard somebody tell me that the church was going to make it because have lasted for at least 5 years. It was the right intention, but it was the wrong thing. And let me tell you why it was the wrong thing, even though it was the right intention. Because 6 years ago, Jenna and myself left our family, our friends, our home, our jobs, a 2-bedroom, $800 apartment a month. Are you kidding me? They exist. And we left. And we moved into a studio with our bed in our closet. And we moved to San Francisco because we believe that God has great things in store for this city, and we wanted to be a part of it. Everyone told us that no church could make it in San Francisco, no church could thrive in San Francisco, and we believed that that was untrue. So we gave our lives to building something here in San Francisco that would outlive our lives. And 6 years ago, about 23 people also packed up and took one of the biggest risks of their lives and moved from Arizona and moved here to San Francisco to be a part of starting this church called Canvas. And then 5 years ago, around the time of our launch, we walked circles around the neighborhood, the district of the Marina. Literally walked circles around the Marina, mile after mile after mile, praying for this neighborhood. You should know that if you're here and you've been a part of the Canvas story, you are an answer to prayer that was prayed over 5 years ago as we circled this neighborhood. And we prayed for a lot of things. We prayed for Canvas to be a place where everyone can belong. We prayed that Canvas would be a place where no matter what race you are, no matter what socioeconomic class you are, no matter what gender you are, no matter who you are, that you would have a seat at the table because we believe the table of God is a big enough table for everybody. We prayed that we would see people who were enslaved to the tyranny of stuff be freed by the power of generosity. We prayed that those who hated God would find nearness to God and find hope in God. We prayed that Canvas would be a safe place to be, to say it's not okay when you're not okay. We believed that God was going to do great things in this church and in this city. We prayed for a lot of things, but can I tell you, one prayer we did not pray? One prayer we did not pray as we walked and marched around this neighborhood. We never prayed, "Dear God, creator of the universe, help us just to make it." We never prayed, "God, the one who conquered death, if it is at all possible, could you please empower your people to make it?" We wouldn't dare insult God with such a small prayer. We wouldn't dare insult God with such a prayer that we could see happen without God. We wanted to pray prayers that were too big for us because we knew when they were too big for us, it was just right for God. See, I don't think God is intimidated by our big prayers, but I believe that He may be insulted by our small ones. And so we would never bring a small prayer that truly we could see happen without God's power. We only brought the kind of prayers that brought us to our knees in total dependence in this living God. We never prayed, God, will we just make it? And there's a very simple reason as to why we didn't pray those sorts of prayers, and that is because God's vision for His church is not just to make it. His vision for His church is not just survival. His vision for His church is to thrive. His vision for His church is to flourish and to be an agent of flourishing in the world. The church should make wherever it is better because of what God is doing in the community. So God's vision for the church is never to make it. And can I bring this on a personal level? God's vision for your life is never to just make it. So if you are living a life simply just trying to get by, trying to arrive safely at death, you are living outside of God's fullest potential for your life, because a life well lived is not about the years of your life, but the life of your years, and is up to you each and every day how much life will be in the years of your life. You see, it's so important that you understand that you were never created, we were never created to simply just make it. And so in 2019, I've been asking God, I've been going, God, what do you want to do in your church in 2019? What new thing are you doing? Where are you going? How can we follow you? Because you should know, it might say lead pastor on there. We maybe need to change that. I'm like, I don't even know if that's right, because Jesus is the lead pastor of His church. And at the end of the day, we're here just to follow our lead pastor, Jesus. And so we've been seeking to hear the voice of Jesus. Where are you going, and how can we be a part of your vision? We're not interested in trying to get God to be a part of our vision. His vision's always better. And so as we prayed and as we sought the Lord, I felt like God kept dropping this word in my heart. And the word is rooted. 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 I'm praying. I remember a couple Friday nights ago, I could not go to sleep. I pulled an all-nighter because God just kept speaking this word, rooted, 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 into my heart. And I believe it's a word for us in 2019, rooted. And it's kind of anticlimactic, is it not? Like if I'm like, here's our vision for 2019, rooted. I noticed none of you clapped. Because it really does, on the surface at least, does not sound that exciting. And we've had vision statements in previous years that I thought had a little more oomph to it. You know, in 2016, we had a vision, and our vision for that year was to make room, because this small little tribe at Presidio Theater was starting to grow and grow and grow. And so we started a second service there at Presidio and just wanted to follow God's favor. And then in 2017, our vision, maybe some of you remember, it was Prepare the Way. And Prepare the Way was a year where we began to speak out loud the vision that God had spoken to us, Jenna and I, years before, and that was that we want to be a church of multiple churches here in San Francisco. We want to launch multiple canvases here in San Francisco. And so we began to announce that this is in the works. And yes, we're taking a very slow road to that destination because we want to do it right. But I have some exciting news. In just a few weeks, we're going to be sharing some updates about the second church and what God is doing. And by the way, our pastors for that second church, the Tackett's just had their baby. And that's good news. Baby Claire. Baby Claire. Prepare the way. We started dreaming about how could God prepare us for even greater things than what we had seen. Not just 2 services, but 2 churches. And it's still a huge part of our vision here at Canvas. Then last year, maybe some of you came within the last year, you might recall our vision in 2018, and that was to strike the ground. That was straight Braveheart status, wasn't it? Like, strike the ground. And we were committed in 2018 to take the arrows God has given us and strike the ground again and again and again until we had nothing else to strike. In other words, it was a year we were going to take leaps of faith. We were going to do things that maybe on paper didn't make sense, but we believe that God is in the business of making the impossible possible. We believe God is in the business of making the illogical possible. And we've seen God do it in 2018 because in 2018 we moved from Presidio Theater because we ran out of room. We made room and then we ran out of room. And so we moved here to Marina Middle School, believing that God was positioning us to have a great partnership with the school here so that we can flourish the school but also have a place to call home. And man, God has been doing so many good things in the relationship here at Marina Middle School. I have meetings with the principal principal once a month. And this past Thursday, I met with the principal, and she ended it, and she looked at me, and she said, Travis, I just want you to know we are so glad you're here. We're so glad you're here. Just so you know, that's not normal with principals with churches. That's not normal. What God has been doing with our relationship with Marina Middle has been far from normal. And then in 2018, we were bottlenecking in community groups. We had a lot of you who wanted to join a community group. We didn't have enough leaders to launch community groups. And so we were bottlenecking. And so we realized we really needed to bring on a community groups director. And we took a leap of faith, and we did. And your generosity has empowered us to be able to not only move here, but bring on and expand our team. And we were able to hire Brendan Patubo as our CG director. And now, ever since Brendan has come, we've been launching groups like crazy. He's totally revamped our training. Now, over 300 people in community groups. Guys, the average amount of people in a small group in a church is a little over 25%. We're a church of about 350 with over 300 people in community groups. That means that's awesome. That means the 50 of you who aren't in CGs right now, we're coming for you. We're going to find you, and we're getting you in a group. But Brendan coming on, man, it's been such a good thing. And then we were praying about having a larger Canvas office so that we could continue ministry throughout the week. We were in a basement before. We were in a basement with no windows. It was depressing. And we were there, we were thankful, and it was a good place for the season that we were in, but we knew God was calling us to do greater things throughout the week because we're not just a church that does things on Sunday. But there's things going all throughout the week, ministry happening all throughout the week. And just in case you don't know, real estate is expensive in San Francisco. And so we were very specific, though. We said, God, we want to stay in the marina, and we need a place that we can stay in for a while. And there was this place on Steiner and Chestnut, just a block down. The rate was so low, I thought it was a scam. I thought if it wasn't a scam, there was rats in the walls or something like that. And so I ignored it, but God wouldn't let me ignore it forever. Eventually I went and met the landlord and took a look around the offices and realized this was for us. It was just waiting for me to catch up and realize it. And so we rented this office, and it's been a huge win for our church as trainings happen there, community groups happen there. This next Thursday, we're hosting our first ever happy hour for all the faculty of Marina Middle School. How awesome is that? They're all going to come there after school. We're having a free taco bar, drinks. We're bringing in a guy to do trivia, and then we have a masseuse that's going to be giving away free massages to the teacher. Come on, somebody's like, I'm a teacher. I want to go. It's going to be amazing. And isn't it great that we have the space to do that now? To love our teachers and to do that? See, we were striking the ground, and we're only a church that's 5 years old in the most expensive city in the country. We shouldn't be seeing the kind of favor we're seeing, but God is opening door after door after door. And I want to just remind you that God uses His people to open those doors. You are His plan. You are how He moves in the city. And so through your generosity, we've been able to see these things come to pass. And so God has been faithful. And so I went into 2019 going, okay, God, make room, good, prepare the way, awesome, strike the ground. Yeah, what are you going to do next, God? I was expecting something bold and courageous that would make Braveheart look like Bambi, it would be so good. And then God said, rooted. Rooted. And it didn't feel like much to me, if I'm honest. If I can be real, I almost doubted that was coming from God. It seemed too simple. It seemed so unimpressive. And maybe that's a defect in my faith. That sometimes I think I can convince myself that it is only impactful if it's impressive. That it's only impactful if it's impressive. But what was so impressive about David? A little shepherd boy, lowest of his brothers. He took bread and cheese. He was the original Postmate. And he took it to his brothers, and all of a sudden he finds himself fighting a giant. It was unimpressive. To be honest, the story and how it began was pretty boring, and yet it led to impact. See, just because it's unimpressive doesn't mean it cannot lead to impact. What was so impressive about Moses? Moses was a murderer with a speech impediment. And God says, I'm going to use you to not only free an entire nation out of slavery that they've been in the last 400 years under the most powerful regime in the known world at that point in time, but I'm also going to use you to be my mouthpiece to the most powerful man walking planet Earth at that time. If you were looking for impressive, Moses wasn't it. And yet, God used this unimpressive person for impactful purposes. What about the disciples? These disciples were a hot mess. I mean, the 12 disciples of Jesus, have you noticed Jesus picked 12 disciples and not one of them was a rabbi? They were all ordinary, uneducated men. As a matter of fact, in Acts chapter 4, the religious lead of the day were mocking these men, saying they're uneducated, they're ordinary. The only thing that separated them from others is that they had been with Jesus. You see, you may feel ordinary and uneducated and unequipped, but when you're with Jesus, anything's possible. When your life intersects with Jesus, anything is possible. He can take what is unimpressive and do something impactful with it. And so these uneducated, ordinary people, I mean, Jesus had to look like he was rolling with Duck Dynasty when he rolled into town. And yet Jesus used these 12 people who by all means were unimpressive for great impact in the world. And so I leaned into this word, rooted. Maybe I'm missing something. It's not very impressive to me, God, but maybe there's something impactful that you're wanting to do through this single word, rooted. And then it all became crystal clear. Don't you love when that happens? When all of a sudden you realize God's not late to the party, you are. And God fills you in. Ephesians chapter 3. God brought me back to this passage where Paul, he's written a letter to a church in Ephesus, maybe like a group of people like us. And Paul is writing to them about how he's praying for them. In Ephesians 3, 14 through 19, Paul says this. He says, "For this reason I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you," and can we say the bolded line out loud together? "I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the Lord's holy people to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God." This powerful letter, this heartfelt moment between Paul and this church that he helped start in a place called Ephesus. Now, it's easy when you read the Bible, because the way the Bible is broken up into chapters, it's easy to read a chapter in the scriptures in isolation. And the issue is when you read the chapter in isolation, you miss what came before it, and sometimes what comes before it is so important for you to understand if you're going to understand what you just read. And if you don't know what came before it, then when I tell you Paul says, "For this reason I kneel," you might be going, well, what's the reason? Well, you need to go to Ephesians chapter 2, 19 through 22 to know the reason that Paul was on his knees praying for this church in Ephesus, and he'll begin to clear it up. In verse 19 of chapter 2, Paul says this, "So now you Gentiles," Gentiles are non-Jews, there were Jews, there were Gentiles. So if you weren't a Jew, you were a Gentile. He says, "So now you Gentiles are no longer strangers and foreigners. You're citizens along with all of God's holy people. You're members of God's family. Together we are his house, built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, and the cornerstone is Christ Jesus himself. We are carefully joined together in him, becoming a holy temple for the Lord. Through him, you Gentiles are also being made part of this dwelling where God lives by his Spirit." So what Paul is saying here in Ephesians 2, 19 through 22 is he's saying God is building something that none of them saw coming. See, they had a vision for the future, but the vision paled in comparison to God's vision for the future. That happens a lot, it seems, with people. You see, Israel thought that the family of God was going to be exclusively for the Jewish people. But Paul is saying now, because of Jesus, God is bringing the whole world together. And by the way, if your theology of God does not bring the whole world together but separates people, there is something wrong with your theology, because God is all about bringing the world, every nation, every tribe, every tongue together, and we should be about the same thing. You see, before Jesus' plans, before Jesus, the church, the body of God, the community that followed Jesus was for a nation. The promise was for a nation. But now Paul is saying God's plans and purposes are for the entire world. And not only that, but before Jesus, God's Spirit would dwell in a temple. But after Jesus, we're told that God's Spirit doesn't dwell in a building or a temple or any sort of facility. It dwells in people. God is building a house, and we are the house. Everyone say, we are the house. We are the house. He's building a temple, and it's not one with brick and mortar. It's ones with blood and guts and bones and muscle. It's you and me. It's the family of God. It's us. People are God's plan to bring reconciliation into the world here and now. And so you could imagine, as Paul is explaining everything that God has done and everything that God is doing, you could imagine this church in Ephesus thinking, how do we get in on that? Like, how do we get in on all that God is doing? Because we don't want to miss what God is up to. And that is where Paul continues. And he says, it's because of this. It's for this reason I kneel and I pray for you. And he says, I'm praying that God would make his home in you. He says, I'm praying that God will build a temple out of each and every one of you, that the people of God would make the invisible God visible to the world, wanting to see him. But then he goes on. And what he says next is so interesting. He says, I'm praying that you would be rooted and established in love. Now, we need to pause there because what Paul doesn't pray is just as important as what Paul does pray. You see, Paul doesn't pray for the church in Ephesus and go, if you're going to experience everything that God has for you, God, I pray that they would have perfectly figured out doctrine. He doesn't go, God, I pray that if they're going to step into the fullness of life, that they have the greatest of Bible studies. He doesn't say, may they have political power. He doesn't say, may their programs be mind-blowing. He doesn't say any of that. And what he doesn't pray is just as important as what he does pray. What he does pray is that we would be rooted and established in what? In love. He goes on to say, may they understand how long, how high, and how deep the love of God is. And Paul even goes as far to say that it is when we're rooted and established in love that we will experience the full measure of the fullness of God. In other words, you will reach that fully alive life your soul craves. And it's not that doctrine's not important. It is. It's not that Bible studies aren't helpful. They can be. It's not an indictment against programs. And if you feel called to the political arena, it's not saying you shouldn't do that. But apparently Paul believes that love is not just a supplement for your life, but it is the foundation of your fully alive life. That love is not just a crutch we lean on. Love is the ground we walk on, and love has a name, and his name is Jesus. And he says, if you want to experience the full measure of the fullness of God, you need to be rooted in love. And so in 2019, our goal, our vision, our desire is to be rooted as a church family. To be rooted in the wide, long, high, and deep love of God. And as we do this, what I believe will happen is we will be a church experiencing the full measure of the fullness of God. Who doesn't want that? I believe you want that, the fully alive life. And it begins with rooting ourselves in the love of God. And so for this entire year, we're going to be focusing on this idea of being rooted, and we're going to be focusing on 5 key areas that we desire to be rooted in as a church family, and that is, number 1, it's Jesus. We want to be rooted in Jesus. We want to be rooted in our identity. We want to be rooted in community. We want to be rooted in our mission, and we want to be rooted in personal health. We want to be rooted in Jesus, identity, community, mission, and health. By the way, if you're wondering where our sermon series are going, you're looking at it right there. This is where we're going for 2019. Because when we are rooted in Jesus, we experience the full life that he has to offer. The deeper the roots, the fuller the life. The deeper the roots, the fuller the life. And we're going to be launching some initiatives, and that's why I want to invite you all to actually go on your calendar, on your phone, and put down March 10th at 6 p.m. March 10th at 6 p.m., I'm going to ask you, if you call this your church home, to make sure that you are there March 10th at 6 p.m. We're working on a location right now. Our first option didn't work out, but we're working on something else. March 10th, 6 p.m., I'm going to ask you to make it a priority to be there. If you have kids, get a babysitter. I'm giving you like a month's heads up. You can do it. all the babysitters here will be taken because they'll be here March 10th. If you have plans, cancel the plans. Who plans that far in advance anyways? And make sure that you're there March 10th at 6 p.m. because on March 10th at 6 p.m. we're going to actually have our first ever worship and vision night. It's going to be a night of extended worship. It's going to be a night where we cast the vision for the year to come. It's going to be an absolutely amazing, amazing night as we dream together and strategically move together towards being more rooted and as followers of Jesus. I'm excited about that. Is anybody else a little pumped about it? It's going to be the first thing that we ever do, the first vision night we've ever done, and I think it's going to be a powerful, powerful night. But you need to know something. If you're going to get why this whole rooted thing is important, maybe you're sitting there and go, I still don't know exactly why this is important. See, Paul knew doctrine better than most. He could likely lead the best Bible study you could ever imagine. He had influence and power galore. But he makes it clear that you can know much and yet still have little if you don't have love. That you can know much, and yet you'll still have little if you don't have love. According to Paul, rootedness is not going to church. Just because you go to church doesn't mean you're rooted in Jesus. Rootedness doesn't mean knowing information about Jesus. You know what they call people who know a lot of information about a person that they don't know? A stalker. There's some of y'all, you're a stalker of Jesus, but stalking doesn't equal rootedness. Rootedness doesn't mean attending a class. Rootedness doesn't mean having superior moral behavior. It is entirely possible to have a tree that looks nice on the outside but has no roots. We call it a Christmas tree. And Christmas trees can only survive for a season before they're on the curb. And so it is with Christians who have no deep roots in their faith. You might have the kind of faith that will last for a season, but it's only a matter of time that your faith is on the curb. See, God has been breaking my heart for some of you as I've been thinking about rooted and thinking about you. I hope you know I don't stand in a place of superiority or anything like that. I feel like I'm growing right alongside you, and I feel like a brother at times to all of you. And I don't know, I come to God and I go, God, can you just move in their hearts? Can you move in their lives? Can you break down walls? Can you break down barriers? And I have continued to be grieved in my heart for some of you. And what grieves me is that some of you have enough depth in your heart with Jesus to be informed about Jesus, but you don't have enough depth with Jesus to be transformed by Jesus. And you should know being informed about Jesus is different than being transformed by Jesus. And Jesus didn't go to a cross and die and rise again so you could be informed. He died and rose again so you could be transformed. And what grieves me is some of you are only informed and you're okay with it. I'm grieved because some of you aspire and pride yourselves on being a pro in theology. And while you may be a pro in theology and doctrine and you can quote scripture like it's nobody's business, you are an amateur in love. And you're okay with it. See, my heart grieves because there's maybe some of you in this room that did not understand what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 13 verse 1 when he says you can have wisdom that the angels have. You can have the highest form of knowledge. And yet if you don't have love, Paul says you're a clanging gong. I grieve because maybe there's some of you that you were created to make music with your life and you're just making noise. I grieve because maybe there's some of you in this place that you have been convinced that your behavior is God's first priority. But friend, you need to understand your behavior is not God's first priority. You are God's first priority. I'm grieved because some of you used to burn with love for God. I mean, there was a day that you were like, nothing can stop me. I love God. I'm going to give my life to Him. And you meant it, but now you are what the Bible calls lukewarm. And what concerns me even more than those who are lukewarm, it's those who are lukewarm in this place, and you hear me saying you're lukewarm, and you know you're lukewarm, and you're going to leave here and do nothing about it. That grieves me, but you know what grieves me even more than that? Not just those who are lukewarm, not just those who know they're lukewarm are going to leave this place and not do anything about it, but those who are lukewarm know they're lukewarm, not going to do anything about it because they're lukewarm and they love it. That grieves me because I believe with everything that is in my heart that you were created for more, that you were created for a fully alive life. And what is true in dendrology and the study of trees is true in our theology and the study of God, and that is that if you want to live tall, you need to grow deep. That if you want to live tall, if you want to flourish, If you want to see God move in and through your life in ways that would blow your mind, then you need to grow deep. Just as soil is what roots of a tree cling to, it is also the soil that the roots receive the nutrients it needs to thrive in its lifetime. And Paul says if we're going to live tall, we need to grow deep in the love of God. And God's love is not just the soil we cling to in the midst of storms, but God's love is also the nutrients our soul needs to not only survive, but thrive, because you weren't created just to survive. You were created to thrive. See, if you want to live tall, you got to grow deep. You got to grow deep. So how do we get to this? How do we grow deep? That's the question we're going to be asking all year long. How do we grow deep in our identity? How do we grow deep in our relationship with Jesus? How do we grow deep in our community? How do we grow deep in living a life of meaning? And how do we grow deep in living a life of health? But to get us started, I just wanted to, bring this idea out of Jeremiah 17, 7 through 8. I want to end with this. Jeremiah 17. Jeremiah says this, he says, "But blessed are those who trust in the Lord, that have made the Lord their hope and confidence. They are like trees planted along a riverbank with roots that reach deep into the water. Such trees are not bothered by the heat or worried by long months of drought. Their leaves stay green, and they never stop producing fruit." Just in case you're wondering, he's not actually talking about a tree. He's talking about people, you and myself. And I love that last part. It says their leaves stay green and they never stop producing fruit. I don't know about you, that's the kind of life I want. Even when the heat rages, I want to continue to live fully alive. Even when the droughts come, I want to continue to live this life fully alive. Yeah, I want to engage in the fullness of life that God has to offer me. And what Jeremiah reminds us here is such an important truth to be grasped, and is this, that your success is only as sustainable as your source. That your success is only as sustainable as your source. And when Jesus is your source, when His love is your source, you will have what you need for sustainable success in your life. What a vision for the future we're given here. What a vision for our future as a church family. What a vision that could be for San Francisco. It's not a vision just to make it. It's a vision to flourish. It's a vision to grow tall as we grow deep. I love what Simon Weil, he said, to be rooted is perhaps the most important and least recognized need of the human soul. To be rooted is perhaps the most important and least recognized need of the human soul. I've been thinking about this message, and one of my personal convictions as a communicator in the church is that I never just want to stand up here and tell you what the Bible said. I want to communicate what the Bible's still saying as well. Because I believe that the Bible said some things, but you know what I also believe? I believe the Bible's still speaking. I believe the Bible is still speaking into your 2019. The Scriptures speak into our relationships. The Scriptures speak into our struggle. The Scriptures speak into our future. I believe the Scriptures are still saying things. And so whenever I stand up here, I want to stand up here and help us all figure out how can we begin to apply this. And I was struggling with it this week, if I'm honest. I was at Starbucks yesterday. I probably looked grumpy because I was so focused at my table, focusing on what God was wanting to say. And then it hit me. I read Jeremiah 17 multiple times, and God brought me back to the tree that was planted. In Jeremiah 17, the tree that was planted, and what I felt like God maybe whisper into my spirit was, Travis, do you know that all the tree did was put himself where life was, and he was still. That the tree placed himself where the tree needed to be, and then he was still long enough for its roots to go deep into the living water that was giving it life. And so what is the application of this? How do we begin to live out this rooted idea in our lives? It's not going to happen overnight. It'll happen over time, but here's your role in the process. Get yourself where life is and stay there. Get yourself where Jesus is and stay there and let Jesus do what only Jesus can do. Get yourself in spaces where hope is. Get yourself in spaces where grace is. Get yourself out of anything that is destructive, anything that breaks you down, anything that is not of God. Get yourself to the living water of Jesus and allow Him to begin to feed your soul. What does it look like for you to begin to position yourself where love is? See, you need to understand something. Love has been chasing you ever before you even knew there was a God who was pursuing you. Love has always been chasing you. This God is relentless. His love is scandalous. So can I ask you today, what would it look like for you to be caught by love? What would it look like for you to stop running? What would it look like for you to put yourself where love is and to stay there long enough for love to catch you? Because I can tell you right now that it is insanity to run from God if you're searching for love, because love is not what God does. It is who God is. What does it look like to say, I'm planting myself in the love of Jesus? And even when the storms rage, and even when life is unpredictable, and even when I don't have all the answers, I'm staying planted where love is. I'm staying planted in the love of Jesus. And allow your roots to begin to go down deep into who He is. What does it look like to be caught by love? May we in 2019, may we as a church family, as individuals, may we root ourselves in love. And may we be so rooted in love that when the heat rages and the droughts come, that we would continue to live tall because we've grown deep. And may we flourish, but also may we be agents of flourishing in this world. And may we plant ourselves in Jesus. And as we do that, may we experience the full measure of the fullness of God. You were not created to just make it. You were created to thrive. You were created to live tall. So may we grow deep in love.
Hey, we hope you enjoyed today's teaching. You know, the Canvas vision is all about pointing creatives to their Creator, that they would become fully alive followers of Jesus. And that vision is committed to you. And we want to invite you to be committed to that vision through your generosity. You can do that by setting up a one-time gift or recurring donations at canvas-sf.com, or even better, by downloading the Canvas app. Church, we love you, and we believe that the absolute best days are yet to come.